The conference room is empty except for the two of us and the November night pressing dark against the glass. She stands at the window, holding a glass of water she hasn't touched in 20 minutes. The detective's words are still ringing in my ear. 2 suspects. One managed the identities, one managed the money, and the person who just described exactly how that money moved, with a precision that felt less like analysis and more like memory, is standing right in front of me. I have trusted her with everything. My name, my stolen life, my supposed marriage to a woman I had never met. And now I have to ask myself, what if I trusted the wrong woman? If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. The statement was from Meridian Trust. I did not bank with Meridian Trust. I had never in my life banked with Meridian Trust. Meridian Trust was the kind of institution that had marble lobbies and quarterly dividends and clients who wore watches that cost more than my rent. And while I was not exactly struggling, I was a freelance photojournalist in my late 20s with a reasonable savings account at a credit union that did not have a doorman or, as far as I could tell, a philosophy. I set my coffee down on the kitchen counter. I picked the statement back up. I read it again. The account had been open for 8 months. The account had a balance of $47,212. My name was on it. My social security number, my actual social security number, the last 4 digits visible in the formatted account details was on it. My address was on it. And then, Veda Holt, listed as spouse. Her social security number, last 4 digits. A different address, somewhere across the city in a zip code that corresponded to the neighborhood with the restaurants I could not quite afford, and the coffee shops that charged $7 for something I could make at home in 4 minutes. My upstairs neighbor Kip dropped something heavy at that moment, his version of good morning, which involved a domestic collision followed by a brief negotiation with his cat. The sound was so aggressively normal that it almost broke the particular unreality of what I was holding. Almost. I called the bank. The automated system had me navigate 9 menu options before a representative named Todd answered with the particular quality of professional cheer that exists in call centers and nowhere else on earth. I told Todd I had received a statement for an account I had never opened. I told Todd the account listed me as married to a woman I had never met. I told Todd there was $47,000 in an account bearing my social security number that I had no knowledge of whatsoever. Todd told me that for account security, he would not be able to discuss account details over the phone without first verifying my identity. I told him that verifying my identity was precisely the problem. Todd suggested I visit a branch location with 2 forms of government-issued identification. I stared at the wall above my kitchen cabinet, where I had taped a photograph I had taken in Reykjavik 2 years ago. All that gray light and black rock, and the particular flatness of water under a low sky, and thought about what it meant that the most human thing about this experience so far was the dead-eyed automaton energy of the bank's phone representative. The nearest Meridian Trust branch was 11 blocks from my apartment. I walked because I needed the cold air and because I was the kind of person who, when faced with a crisis, needed to move through it physically. My therapist in my early 20s had called this kinesthetic processing, which I had found useful as a description and not particularly calming as a practice. November had descended on the city with its usual combination of wet pavement and shortened daylight, and the particular smell of cold concrete after rain. My breath showed. I had forgotten my scarf. The sky was the flat pewter of a sky that had given up on being impressive and was simply committing to gray. The sky was the flat pewter of a sky that had given up on being impressive and was simply committing to gray. The branch was exactly what Meridian Trust suggested from the outside. Marble floors, wood-paneled walls, and warm walnut, the soft engineered warmth of a lobby that did not want anyone to feel the cold. A woman at the reception desk had the considered professionalism of someone trained to de-escalate before escalation had begun. I told her I needed to speak with a branch manager. I told her it was about fraud. The word landed with its appropriate weight. She made a call. A man appeared, dark suit, precisely parted hair, name badge that read Callan Reed, branch manager, and guided me to a private consultation room with a glass door and a round table and 2 chairs that were probably supposed to communicate collaborative resolution, and instead made me feel like someone had been expecting me. I put the statement on the table. He studied it. He had the composed attentiveness of someone who had encountered complicated situations before and had developed the professional resources to process them without producing a facial expression that could be used against the institution. Later, Miss Farrow, he said, I want to make sure I understand what you're telling me. I'm telling you, I said, that I did not open this account. I have never been married. The woman listed as my spouse is a person I have never met. And your institution has been processing financial activity on this account for 8 months without asking me a single question. He had already pulled something up on the tablet between us. He turned it toward me. The account had been opened 8 months ago at a different branch location, across the city in a district I rarely visited. The opening documentation included a marriage certificate, both social security numbers, a joint application with 2 signatures. The signature under my name was not mine. It was close. Whoever had done this had studied my signature with some care, but it had the particular dead quality of a practiced forgery. The loops were not mine. The pressure was wrong. That is not my signature, I said. He looked at it carefully. He was professionally measured. I understand that is what you're telling us. I am not saying it is not my signature because I am mistaken, I said. I have been a professional photographer for 9 years. I have been looking at visual detail for precision for 9 years. That is not the shape of my handwriting. The pressure points are wrong. The baseline drift is wrong. Whoever told you that this matched my signature either did not look carefully or did not have anything to compare it to. He absorbed that without defending the branch that had processed it. He was already on his phone, speaking quietly, using the specific institutional language that meant, we have a problem and we are going to contain it before it becomes a larger one. He told me, when he came back to the table, that they would freeze the account pending investigation. He told me I should file a police report as quickly as possible and provide the case number to the bank's fraud division. He told me that the other account holder had also been contacted regarding a standard fraud review process that had been triggered automatically by pattern of withdrawal irregularities 14 days ago. The other account holder, I said. Veda Holt. He nodded carefully. Yes. Has she been in? I asked. He said that was information he could not disclose. I looked at the statement on the table. $47,212 in an account bearing both our names. In a marriage neither of us had contracted. Someone had done a great deal of organized work to put us in the same bank account. I wanted to know who. More specifically, I wanted to know who knew enough about me to do it. I walked home with a police report packet in my bag, and a headache that was building behind my left eye, with the patient commitment of something that had decided to stay for the season. I called Blythe from the corner near my building. Blythe answered on the second ring, because Blythe always answered on the second ring. It was one of the constants of my life, along with the fact that she would say exactly the true thing, and that she would stay until I was okay, in whatever order those needed to happen. I need you to come over, I said. Something happened. Are you hurt? She asked, in the specific tone that distinguished between social need and actual emergency. I'm fine, I said. I'm just married to a stranger. A pause that lasted exactly as long as she needed to decide whether to ask for context immediately or get in the car first. I need context, she said. I know. Come over. She came over. She was a nurse who worked 12-hour shifts and still managed to be the most organized person I knew in her personal life, which she attributed to the fact that professional chaos had trained her to make off-duty structure non-negotiable. She sat at my kitchen table with the patient attention of someone who had learned not to have visible reactions to unexpected information. She read the statement twice. She read the police report packet once. She looked up. $47,000, she said. 8 months, I said, sitting there, with both our names on it. Who's Veda Holt? That is exactly the question. She's in the zip code with the very good coffee. Blythe already had her phone out. She had already searched the name. Veda Holt, she said. Partner at Crane and Whitfield. Corporate law. She's been with the firm for 9 years. Before that, she was a federal prosecutor, she said, turning the phone toward me. There is a photograph on the firm website that looks like it was taken with the specific intention of making you understand that you would lose. I looked at the photograph. It was the kind that law firms commission: neutral background, professional lighting, the subject positioned to communicate both authority and the kind of composure that authority produces when it has been genuinely earned. Veda Holt looked directly at the camera with gray eyes and an expression so composed it had stopped being an expression and become a position. She had dark hair, cropped short in a way that read as deliberate rather than minimal. She was in a suit that was dark and tailored and fit the way clothes fit when someone has decided that how they present in a room is not a casual decision. She looked like a woman who had decided, some years ago, that nothing was going to surprise her. She is going to be furious about this, I said. She looks like she already is, and is simply waiting for the appropriate context, Blythe said. I wonder if she's been contacted. Blythe looked at the website on her phone. The firm's main number is right here. I looked at the statement. I looked at the photograph. I thought about $47,000 sitting in an account bearing my name and this stranger's name for 8 months, while someone I had never met was apparently already investigating it. I'm going to call her, I said. Tonight? Tomorrow morning, I said. I am going to give a corporate attorney at a white shoe law firm the professional courtesy of not calling her at 9 in the evening to tell her she is fraudulently married to a freelance photographer. Blythe pressed her lips together in the way that meant she was exercising restraint. What? I said. I'm just noting, she said carefully, that I have watched you make decisions under pressure before, and some of them have been very good, and some of them have been the other kind. That is not helpful. I know. It's still accurate. She stayed until 10 and made sure I ate something. When she left, I sat at the kitchen table with the statement and the police report packet and the photograph I had pulled up again on my own phone. This stranger's gray eyes looking at the camera like a problem she had already started solving. And I thought about who in my life had both the knowledge and the motive to do something this organized. I thought about it until midnight and went to bed. I called the firm at 8:15 the following morning. The reception desk had a warmth that was genuine in the way warmth is genuine when it has been professionally cultivated and consistently maintained. I asked for Veda Holt, a brief hold, then a voice. Even the first syllable had a quality of assessment in it level, not cold, but not warm either, the voice of someone who had been receiving information long enough that the act of listening had become a form of evaluation. This is Veda Holt. My name is Lena Farrow, I said. You don't know me. A half-second pause, the kind that is shorter than a beat but longer than nothing. Then, actually, Miss Farrow, I believe we have a shared account at Meridian Trust. The specific precision of that phrasing. The neutrality of shared account. As if it were a library card rather than a fraudulent marriage. You already knew, I said. I was contacted by the bank's fraud review department 10 days ago, she said. I've had an investigator looking into the account structure since. 10 days, I said. You have been investigating for 10 days and no one contacted me. The investigation had not yet established that you were not a primary actor, she said. Once that was confirmed, I was going to reach out. You were going to reach out, yes. There was something in the patient precision of her voice that was already, in the first 90 seconds of our acquaintance, producing in me the specific desire to say something sharp back. She was not cold. Cold would have been easier to categorize. She was precise, and precision was different. It implied that every word was the chosen word, that nothing was surplus, that she had already filed me in a working hypothesis that she was currently testing for accuracy. I appreciate the investigative rigor, I said. I also would have appreciated knowing that someone was investigating a case that involves my name, my social security number, and my supposed marriage for the past 12 hours. Understood, she said. She said it without apology, which I noted, and without defensiveness, which I also noted. I filed a police report yesterday, I said. Good, that will help. A pause. I'd like to meet. Today, if you're available. There are things I've found that are easier to walk through in person than over the phone. I thought about the photograph on the firm website, the expression that treated everything as a problem with a solution. Where? I said. I'll text you an address. Noon, if that works. I said noon worked. She ended the call without a pleasantry. Pleasantries, I was already certain, were not something she distributed without reason. The address she sent was a coffee shop equidistant between my apartment and her firm's office tower. It was not the marble lobby of Crane and Whitfield. It was a middle ground, the kind of place that was not neutral enough to be impersonal and not casual enough to be accidental. I understood, arriving 4 minutes early, that she had chosen it with the same deliberateness she appeared to bring to everything. She was already there. She had taken the table at the back, positioned to face the door, which was either the habit of someone who had read too many thrillers or the reflex of someone who had spent enough years in authority-adjacent positions that having sightlines on everything entering a room had become simply what you did. She had a cup of black coffee and nothing else on the table. No laptop, no files, no staging. She stood when she saw me approach. It was an old-fashioned gesture, and so completely at odds with the compressed efficiency I had been expecting based on everything so far, that I stopped walking for a half-second before I recovered. She was taller than the photograph had implied. The room communicated authority differently. She moved through it with the quiet economy of someone for whom presence was not something performed but simply produced. Charcoal suit, white shirt, the watch on her left wrist. Her hair was as short and deliberate as the photograph had suggested. The gray eyes, when they met mine, were doing exactly what I had expected. Cataloging. "Lena Farrow," she said. "Not a question. That's me," I said. She waited for me to sit before she sat. I ordered a coffee I did not particularly need and settled into the chair across from her at a table that was small enough to make professional distance a mild effort. She opened with the material no acknowledgement of the strangeness, no comment on the oddness of two strangers meeting to discuss their fraudulent marriage over coffee. She pulled a slim folder from the bag at her feet and placed 3 documents between us with the economy of someone who had done this kind of meeting before. The first document was a copy of the marriage certificate. It had been filed in Harlan County, 200 miles from the city, at a courthouse that Veda told me processed a high volume of registrations and had, during peak periods, reduced verification capacity. The second was a transaction summary showing 8 months of account activity. Money coming in irregular deposits averaging between $3,000 and $8,000 per transaction. Money going out in smaller amounts consistently below the federal reporting threshold, she said, which was not a coincidence. The third was a preliminary forensic account summary. The money was not sitting, it was moving. Structuring, she said. Classic layering technique. Our account is the primary layer, the legitimate-looking face of the structure. The downstream accounts are where it disperses. This is money laundering, I said. In broad terms, yes. She lifted her coffee cup briefly. Whoever designed this is not unsophisticated. I looked at the transaction summary. Someone had not just stolen our identities to open an account for personal use. They had used us as the legitimate-seeming face of a financial operation that had been running for 8 months. Whoever did this knows both of us, I said. Or knows enough about both of us, she agreed. The joint account application required detailed personal information from both parties. This is not opportunistic. Someone chose us specifically. I sat with that. The coffee shop hummed around us. Rain had started against the front windows, the particular soft percussion of late autumn rain on glass, not heavy enough to be dramatic, steady enough to be a presence. Why us specifically? I said. What's the connection between us? I'm a photojournalist. I've never worked in law or finance. Corporate commissions? Occasionally. Annual reports? Investor summits. I've shot for a few different firms over the past 3 years. She waited. A company called Archon Logistics, I said. About 2 years ago. 3-day shoot for their investor summit. I had a full access badge for the building and a contact list for the executives. The change was small. Her posture did not shift. The coffee cup, which she had been about to lift, settled back onto the table without completing the motion. Her jaw did not flex. But something in the quality of her attention changed in the way the quality of a room changes when the pressure drops before a storm. Archon Logistics, she said. Yes, do you know them? I handled a corporate transaction for Archon Logistics approximately 27 months ago, she said. A subsidiary acquisition. My team was embedded with their corporate office for approximately 6 weeks. The same company. Yes, the rain on the windows, the espresso machine, the very small table between us. Someone at Archon, I said. Or someone with access to Archon's records from that period, she said. A client file would include attorney information. A photography contract would include the photographer's information. If someone were building an identity profile on both of us, they would have found us in the same file, I said. She was looking at me now. Those gray eyes, doing their assessing thing. She was composing something. I could see it in the stillness before she spoke, the way someone looks when they are deciding how much of what they know is ready to share. There is one piece I haven't been able to confirm yet, she said. What is it? The deposits come from different sources, she said. Part of the layering. But several of the early deposits trace to an account registered under a name I haven't matched to a real person. It's almost certainly a pseudonym. The name on that account is Gianna Souza. Something went cold in the center of my chest. Miss Farrow, I said. I know someone by the name Gia, whose full name is Gianna. She waited. She did not push. She had the stillness of someone who understood that the next few words needed to arrive at their own speed. She's my ex, I said. We ended things 14 months ago. We were together for almost 2 years. She moved in after about 7 months. She had access to everything in my apartment, my documents, my identification, my daily patterns. I kept my paperwork in a kitchen drawer. There was no reason to be secretive about it. Veda set her coffee cup down with one careful, quiet click. Did she have any connection to legal or financial services work? She asked. She was in corporate administration, I said. She described herself as a project coordinator. She'd had several different positions. I stopped. I was building something in real time that I did not particularly want to build. Watching the pieces arrange themselves into a shape I had not been ready to see this morning in my kitchen. She was very good at understanding how institutions worked, I said. Which offices, which processes, which paperwork pathways. She called it professional curiosity. Veda said nothing. She was entirely still. I said, Did she work at Archon? She turned the folder. Near the back was a page I had not yet seen an internal firm contact list for the Archon transaction. She pointed to a single line. Project Coordinator, Archon Logistics Corporate Office. Gianna Souza. I looked at the name. Gia had always been Gia to me. Gia, who told me once, laughing, that she had practiced forging her mother's signature as a child until it was indistinguishable. Gia, who had been fascinated by my work contracts, who asked detailed questions about how editorial rights were documented and what personal information freelancers were legally required to disclose. Gia, who sometimes, in the particular ease of a long evening, would pick up my pen and trace my signature on a notepad while we talked about other things, a habit, she said, helped her concentrate. I had called it a quirk. I had called it one of the things that made her interesting. She had been studying the document she was going to eventually need to reproduce. I sat in the warmth of the coffee shop with the name Gianna Souza on the firm contact list and thought about what it meant to understand, after the fact, that the attention you had called love had been something else entirely. You are somewhere else right now, Veda said. Her voice was quiet. It was not an accusation. It was just an accurate observation offered without judgment. Yes, I said. She gave me time. She did not redirect to the documents or recapture the professional register. She sat across from me in the coffee shop and gave me the full measure of what I needed to come back from wherever I had gone. She was studying my handwriting, I said, when I came back. For months, I thought it was a habit. She had access to my identification long enough to memorize everything on it. She was the project coordinator for a corporate deal that put your firm's contact information in the same file as mine, and then when we ended things, she had everything she needed. I looked at Veda. Has she left the city? I asked. The account activity suggests the account manager has not been local for approximately 6 weeks, she said. The withdrawal pattern changed less frequent, larger amounts, from ATMs in markets that are not this city. She's gone. For now. The rain had thickened against the glass. The coffee shop was warm in the particular sealed way of warm places when cold weather is happening on the other side of the window. I thought about 14 months ago, when Gia had left my apartment with 2 bags and a plant she had been overwatering since March, and a goodbye that had been civil and sad in the specific way of endings that are correct, even when they hurt. I had not suspected anything. Why would I have? The account had not been opened yet. The crime had not yet started. Or perhaps it had started in her mind already. Perhaps the 2 years had been the planning stage, and the 14 months since were the execution. Perhaps she had left when she had what she needed and not before. That thought was the one I could not sit inside for long. I filed it away. I would deal with it on a night when I had the energy. I need to update my police report, I said. Yes, Veda said. I'll have Saren, my legal assistant, compile the Archon documentation into a format the detective can use. It will be more efficient than presenting raw firm records. I appreciate that. She was looking at me. The cataloging was still happening, but it had changed quality, less diagnostic, more present. I said, "What do we do about the marriage certificate?" "A dissolution filing," she said, without hesitation. "Because the fraud will need to be legally unwound, not just financially. The marriage certificate, even fraudulent, exists in the county records. We'll need to file to have it declared void from the beginning, void ab initio. It's a straightforward process once the fraud is established in court, which the financial evidence makes likely. So we have to go through a legal dissolution," I said. "For a marriage we never entered." "Technically, yes." She held my gaze, and the corner of her mouth moved barely, the smallest possible acknowledgement of the specific absurdity of what we were saying. I laughed. I could not help it. The absurdity of it. The specific improbability of sitting across from the most composed woman I had ever encountered in any context and being told we needed to file to end a marriage that had started in a forged document at a courthouse 200 miles away. Veda Holt's mouth did the thing. 1 corner, 0.5 millimeter. It was there, and then it was gone, and she had reorganized her expression back to composed before I had fully cataloged what I had seen. But I had cataloged it. I had a feeling I was going to be cataloging her millimeters. The second meeting was at her firm. She had called the day after the coffee shop, not a text, a call, which I understood as a deliberate choice to say that Saren had organized the investigative materials into a format that would be more useful to review with the actual documents present. She said it the way she would have said it about a client briefing, and I was technically her client, except that I was also her co-victim, which was the kind of structural complexity that Veda Holt appeared to manage by simply not acknowledging it aloud. Crane and Whitfield occupied 3 floors of a building that was what the Meridian Trust branch had been approximating with its marble effect floors. This was the source material. The elevator had carpet in the specific shade of deep navy that communicated institutional permanence rather than ambition. The reception area had flowers, white and cream, no color, and a woman at the front desk whose welcome was genuine and practiced simultaneously. Saren met me at the elevator. She was 24 or 25, bright and focused, carrying a tablet with the concentrated energy of someone who had been given a problem and had decided to take it personally. She walked me to a conference room that was larger than my apartment's combined living space and smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Veda was at the far end of the conference table, on the phone. She looked up when I entered, held up one finger, and dealt with whatever was on the other end with the compressed efficiency of someone who could resolve a complicated matter in the exact time she allocated to it. She resolved it in 35 seconds. She set the phone face down on the table. "Apologies. The bank's legal team has new theories about the downstream account structure. Good theories or problematic ones? I asked. Complicated, she said. Which is usually worse than problematic. She moved to the near end of the table where the materials were laid out. Saren had organized them with the clear logic of someone who thought in timelines and evidence chains, a central document row with supporting materials flanking it, each grouping organized by date, each section cleanly separated. Veda looked at the arrangement with the brief, approving expression of someone whose system had been correctly understood. I stood beside her at the table. The conference room was wide enough that we could have stood at opposite ends. We stood close because we were looking at the same documents, her shoulder a few inches from mine, close enough that I could register the cedar and clean fabric smell of her, the way you register physical proximity when it is with someone who is usually contained at a professional distance and is now simply present. She walked me through the updated picture. The downstream accounts had multiplied. Instead of 3 shells, there were now 7, spread across 4 states, each using a different identity. None of the downstream account holders were real people in the conventional sense. They were real people whose identities had been harvested, other victims of the same operation, who had not yet discovered they were involved. This pattern, Veda said, pointing to the forensic timeline on the central sheet, shows refinement. The structuring methodology is not improvised. It has the characteristics of something that has been adjusted over time based on what has and hasn't triggered review. She has done this before, I said. Not this exact mechanism. The marriage certificate is unusual, but the foundational structure, yes. The forensic analyst's assessment is that this is at minimum a second or third iteration of the same basic operation. She paused, looking at the timeline. Which means there are other victims we haven't found yet. I stood at the table and looked at the document chain that Gia had built over the time she was standing in my apartment, overwatering a plant and learning the pressure of my handwriting. I had given her access because access is what you give people when you love them. That was what access meant. You let someone into the space where your documents were and your routines were and your signature was because that was the nature of trust. She had used it. Completely. Methodically, without any of the feeling that I had thought was mutual. I am aware, I said, that I made this possible. Veda looked at me. I had her in my apartment, I said. I told her things, showed her things, in the ordinary way of sharing your life with someone. If I had been more careful, she would not have had what she needed. Veda was quiet for a moment. The violation of that kind of trust is specific, she said. It is categorically different from other types of fraud. I want to name that clearly. I looked at her. The composure was holding, but there was something in the way she had said it deliberate, measured, not clinical, a distinction she had drawn intentionally. You've had an experience like this, I said. Not fraud, she said, but a comparable category. Someone I trusted using access I had given them for a purpose I had not agreed to. I'm sorry, I said. She nodded. It was not the reflexive professional nod. It was something quieter. We worked through the documents for another hour. She was patient in the way experts are patient when explaining complex material to someone who is paying attention and meeting them the patience that is engagement rather than condescension. She pushed back when I drew a wrong inference, in the level direct way of someone who found accuracy more respectful than agreement. I asked questions. She answered them without condescension or simplification. I pushed back on one of her analytical conclusions, and she considered it, acknowledged the validity of the challenge, and adjusted her read accordingly. I noted that she did not do this often. I noted that she did it for me. At some point, Saren brought coffee without being asked, and left without being asked to leave. I noticed she did not look at either of us when she went. It was past 7 when I looked at the windows and realized the city outside had gone dark while I was not tracking it. The conference room lights had adjusted automatically to compensate, which meant the room had insulated itself from the outside world the way rooms do when the work inside them has become sufficiently absorbing. I should go, I said. Veda looked at the windows as if the darkness was slightly surprising to her also. She had the expression of someone who had been so inside the problem that the external world had stopped asserting itself. Yes, she said. I'll send you the updated evidence brief by end of week. I started gathering my things. She walked me to the conference room door, which I had not expected the gesture of someone seeing a visitor out rather than waiting for them to find their own way. In the hallway outside, where the lighting was lower and the building's after-hours quiet had settled into something close to private, she stopped. She said, "Lena." I turned. She had not used my first name before this moment. She had been Miss Farrow, with the deliberateness of someone choosing to maintain a chosen distance, and choosing it consciously. "Yes," I said. She looked at me for a moment that was half a second longer than the situation required. "You've handled this with more steadiness than most people would," she said. "Under the circumstances." "I'm going to fall apart when I get home," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm saying it anyway." Her face was composed, but her eyes were not in the cataloging mode they operated in during professional focus. They were in something quieter, something that was aware of me in a way that had nothing to do with the fraud case, or the investigation, or the forensic timeline spread across the conference table. I said, "I'll see you soon." She said, "Yes." I walked to the elevator. I did not look back, but I knew the way you know things about people when you have been paying close attention in close proximity that she was watching me go. The elevator opened on the lobby. The marble. The flowers. The night air outside. I walked through it into the November cold and thought, she called me Lena, and I thought, she said I handled this with steadiness, which was not a compliment she would distribute without reason. And I thought, this is the most complicated thing I have ever agreed to, and I agreed to it in a coffee shop at noon with a stranger who is, on paper, my wife. The police detective called me while I was 3 blocks from the firm. Not the private investigator Veda had retained the actual assigned detective from the fraud unit, who had received my report and cross-referenced it with the financial crimes referral from the bank's legal department and had, in the past 24 hours, done significant work. "Miss Farrow," he said, "we have an identification on the primary suspect in your case." I stopped walking. "We've confirmed the identity of Gianna Souza," he said. "She is the same individual as a person who used the name Gia Moreno in her personal life. We have a prior address that matches your police report, and we have financial records that connect her to the account structure you identified. Do you know where she is?" I asked. "We're working on that. We have reason to believe she left the state approximately 6 weeks ago. We're coordinating with federal authorities on the interstate dimensions." "Okay," I said. "There is a second identification attached to the case," he said, and his voice was careful in the way voices are when they are adding a complication. "The forensic pattern of the transaction structure suggests a collaborator. We don't yet have a name, but the analysis shows 2 distinct behavioral profiles in the operation, one who managed the identity acquisition, one who managed the financial mechanics." I stood on the pavement in the November dark. 2 people, I said. "That's what the pattern indicates, yes. We're building that profile now." He gave me a case number update and asked me to direct any documentation from private investigators to the relevant contact. He ended the call. I stood on the pavement. There were 2 of them. Gia had managed the identity acquisition access to me, and, through Archon, to the firm contact file that included Veda's information. The financial architect was someone else. Someone who understood the structure well enough to design a layering system that evaded automated flags for 8 months. Someone who understood the precise threshold below which transactions stayed invisible. I thought about the conference room. The precision of Veda's reading of the downstream accounts, the way she had described the structuring methodology as refined, practiced before the analyst's report confirmed it. I thought about what that knowledge required. Not what it implied. What it required. I pulled out my phone. I opened Veda's contact. She had put herself in my phone before I left the conference room the second time, with the efficiency of someone ensuring that the working relationship had the correct infrastructure. I called her. She answered on the second ring. Lena. The name. Still doing something to the shape of every conversation it entered. "The detective just called me," I said. "There are 2 suspects. One managed the identity acquisition. One managed the financial architecture." She was quiet for 1 beat. "I know," she said. The forensic analyst reached the same conclusion independently this afternoon. The financial architecture is sophisticated, I said. The structuring, the threshold calibration, the downstream account design. Someone with a detailed knowledge of financial crime mechanics built that. She was quiet again. This quiet was longer. You're wondering if I could have, she said. I said, I'm wondering who else could have. A pause. Then, quietly, come back. What? Come back to the office, she said. There is something I haven't told you yet about the Archon transaction. I was still deciding how much of it was relevant to your situation. I've decided. Is it relevant? I asked. Yes, she said. It is. I turned around. I went back. The lobby of Crane and Whitfield at 9 in the evening was different from the lobby at noon. The reception desk was unmanned. The flowers in the side table arrangement were beginning to express the particular fatigue of cut flowers past their first day, and the overhead lighting had shifted from the daytime's warm competence to the after-hours fluorescence that exists in all office buildings past working hours, a light that has nothing to prove and does not try. Saren was still there. She met me at the elevator with the slightly frayed composure of someone who had already put in a very long day and had committed to finishing it. She walked me to the conference room without speaking, which I appreciated. Veda was standing at the window, not sitting at the table, not behind the desk, not in any position that organized the room around professional authority. Standing at the window with the city's November night pressing against the glass from the outside, and in her left hand a glass of water she had clearly not been drinking, just holding. She turned when I came in. She looked at me and not at the door. She had been waiting for me to come back, not hoping, waiting. The distinction between those two things was visible in the specific quality of her stillness, the stillness of someone who had made a decision and was now simply living on the other side of it until the other person arrived. I closed the conference room door behind me. Saren's footsteps retreated down the hall. I said, "Before you tell me what you haven't told me, I want to say something first." She held the glass and waited. I said, "When the detective told me there was a second suspect, a financial architect, someone with a detailed understanding of banking, mechanics, and financial crime structure, my first thought was not about Archon. My first thought was about the person who had described the downstream account methodology to me with a precision that suggested familiarity rather than analysis. That was my first thought. I had it, and then I examined it, and I dismissed it. And then I called you, and you said come back. So I came back. But I needed you to know I had the thought, because I would rather be honest about a suspicion I've already dismissed than be the person who hid something behind politeness." Veda said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "That is the most direct thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." "Is it true?" I said. "That you could have designed it?" "No." She said it without emphasis. "And I can prove it with audit trails and billing records, and the fact that I have been a client of Meridian Trust for 11 years and would not use my own institution as the primary layer of a fraud I designed. But I understand why the structure suggested familiarity. And you're right that the precision was not only analysis." She set the water glass down on the table with one careful click. She moved to the near end of the table and sat not at the head, not in the seat that organized the room, but at the side, in the chair beside the one I usually occupied, the chair that made her a person in the room rather than a professional at the head of it. "I was a federal prosecutor for 4 years before I came to the firm," she said. "White-collar crime, wire fraud, money laundering, structuring. I prosecuted 6 cases in those 4 years that involved methodologies similar to what is in the downstream account structure in our case, the threshold calibration, the irregular deposit intervals, the multi-state shell distribution. I spent 4 years learning exactly how those structures are built because the only way to dismantle them in court was to understand them from the inside." I sat down across from her. "When I first saw the forensic account summary," she said, "I recognized the methodology, not as something I had designed. As something I had encountered before, from that specific prosecutorial period, from files you kept," I said. She looked at me. "Yes. You digitized your prosecution files when you came to the firm." "Yes." Reference material. The financial crime methodology literature is not always updated. Patterns that worked 10 years ago still circulate in modified forms. I retained those files as working reference, and someone accessed them without your authorization. Her jaw was set. Her voice was level. The quality of levelness that takes effort. When I left the federal office and came to the firm, she said, I brought junior associates up through the corporate practice over the first 3 years. One of them was unusually talented background in financial analysis before law school, a speed of comprehension for financial crime mechanics that I found both impressive and useful. I mentored her, included her in complex work. The Archon transaction was one of her primary secondments. She paused. Her name was Eden Cole, she said. She left the firm 16 months ago. Under what circumstances? A performance review in my 3rd year flagged that she had accessed client files she had no legitimate reason to access. Specifically, files from my prosecution period, the case documentation, the methodology analyses, the expert witness materials on structuring techniques. She had accessed them without authorization on at least 4 separate occasions, across a period of approximately 8 months. I kept my eyes on her face. She was looking at the table. I gave her a quiet exit, she said. A reference letter and a formal resignation instead of a bar report. She said she was pursuing other opportunities. I said the firm wished her well. And I made the decision, with the professional reasoning available to someone in my position at that moment, that a quiet exit protected both the firm's interests and hers, and that an unauthorized file access, while serious, did not rise to the level of misconduct that required regulatory reporting. You recognize the methodology in the forensic summary, I said, and you knew it could have come from your files. And you knew the only person who had accessed those files without authorization was the one person you had given a quiet exit rather than a report. Yes, she said. And Eden Cole was on site for the Archon transaction, which is where she met Gia. Almost certainly, she said. They would have had direct professional contact throughout those 6 weeks. Gia was the project coordinator. Eden was embedded on site. Someone who was already planning a financial crime and met a project coordinator with access to contractor identity files. She paused, and that contractor had a relationship with one of the attorneys on the deal. The profile materials were in the same file. Both of us were, for the purposes of building a cover identity, in the same place. I sat with that. The window behind Veda showed nothing but the city's nighttime reflection of itself. So you've been sitting on this for 10 days? I said. Yes. While investigating. Yes. While deciding whether to name her. She said, I was trying to establish first whether the evidence supported the identification before I put a name to it. That is not entirely self-serving. The standard in a situation like this is not to accuse without evidence, and I was building the evidence. But I am also aware that the 10 days gave me time I would not have given a stranger, and that the only thing that distinguishes my situation from a stranger's was that Eden Cole was someone I knew. That distinction matters. I am not going to stand in this room and pretend it doesn't. You gave her a quiet exit, I said, and then she built a federal crime with the knowledge she accessed from your files. Yes. And the reason the 10 days happened is that naming her meant acknowledging that your professional decision 16 months ago had enabled what she did. She did not look away. Her jaw was set, and her eyes were steady, and her voice, when she answered, was the level kind that requires real effort from someone who is accustomed to level voices. Yes, she said. I said. That is what you needed to tell me in person. Yes, I looked at her. The woman at the conference table in her charcoal suit, with her sleeves rolled and the glass of water untouched, and the jacket on the chair behind her, with the full cost of a decision made 16 months ago visible in the set of her shoulders and the accuracy of her answers. She had not made the story smaller. She had not offered me the version that was easier to sit with. She had described the shape of the mistake precisely and had not asked me to reframe the shape or reduce the cost of it. I said, Eden Cole met Gia at the Archon project. Almost certainly, she said. Gia had the identities and the forgery access. Eden had the financial architecture. The forensic analyst believes that division is accurate. The behavioral profiles in the transaction record align with what we know about both of them. Have you contacted the detective? I called him an hour before you called me. He's briefing the federal unit now. I nodded. I heard myself say, I don't think you designed this. I know, she said. You said that when you came in. I said it again because I wanted you to hear it in a different register, I said. Not as a conclusion after suspicion. As a simple statement. Something moved across her face. Brief. Real. The composure absorbed it. She said, Lena. I looked at her. I am sorry, she said, for the withholding. Not for the decision I made about Eden 16 months ago. That is something I will account for through the appropriate channels, and I intend to, but for the withholding from you specifically. You were entitled to this information earlier. I said, You told me tonight, she said. I should have told you the day I made the connection. I looked at her. The woman who, when she decided to be honest, was more honest than anyone I had encountered in recent memory. She had named her own mistake with a precision that had not allowed for softening or excuse. She had described the shape of it and the cost of it and had not asked me to carry either differently than they were. I said, Thank you. She held my gaze for one long, settled moment. I said, I'm going home now. Tonight I will fall apart the way I told you I was going to fall apart, and then I will eat something, and in the morning I am going to be better than I am right now. Yes, she said. I said, You should sleep too. A small pause. She said, I don't sleep particularly well. It was not said for sympathy. It was just accurate, offered without apology. I said, Neither do I. We should try anyway. I picked up my bag. I went to the door and stopped with one hand on the frame and looked back. She was watching me, not composing, not cataloging, just watching me go, with the expression of someone who has said everything they needed to say and is now simply in the room with what it cost. I said, Eden Cole picked the wrong two people. She looked at me. I said, because the two people she used are going to finish this correctly. Something moved across Veda Holt's face. Brief, genuine. Gone before it became something I could hold up to the light and name. I went home. I fell apart the way I had promised. I called Blythe and told her all of it. Eden Cole, the unauthorized file access, the quiet exit, the 16 months of a professional decision sitting inside the architecture of a federal crime. Blythe listened. When I finished, she said, She told you the thing that could cost her the most. Yes, I said. She said it anyway. Yes. Blythe was quiet for a moment. She said, I know I'm not saying anything you haven't already figured out, but the woman who had every professional reason to stay quiet chose to tell you the full version. That's not nothing. I know, I said. She said, Okay, eat something. I ate something. The federal case moved quickly once Veda's disclosure reached the right desk. The detective coordinated with the Financial Crimes Unit and the federal prosecutors who had been building a parallel case on the downstream account structure for weeks, without knowing the names at the center of it. Veda's information, Eden Cole's identity, the unauthorized file access, the methodology connection, the Archon site intersection with Gia collapsed the open investigation into a completed picture within 48 hours. Eden Cole was in Portland. She had been there for approximately 6 weeks, which matched the timeline change in the withdrawal patterns the forensic analyst had already flagged. A federal arrest warrant was executed on a Thursday morning. Gianna Souza was in Phoenix. She was apprehended on Friday afternoon in an apartment registered under a false name. The financial trail she had been trying to live quietly inside was not quiet. It was the loudest thing in the room. Veda called when the arrests were confirmed. She called rather than texted, which I had come to understand as her way of marking something as significant. Both, she said, when I answered. I sat on the edge of my kitchen counter with the Reykjavik photograph on the wall and the November city making its sounds outside. How long until the fraud is formally established in court? I asked. The federal case has a strong evidentiary base, she said. Given the arrests and the financial documentation already in hand, I expect the void ab initio petition can be filed within 3 weeks and heard within 6. We'll need to appear together, I said. At the hearing. Yes. I sat with that. We would need to stand before a judge together, in a courthouse, to formally dissolve a marriage we had never entered. After 3 weeks of meeting in coffee shops and conference rooms and law firm hallways after 9 in the evening, I said, "Are you all right?" She was quiet for a moment. I understood this was not a nothing question for her. She did not distribute answers to personal questions without deciding to, and the decision was visible in the pause. "I am relieved," she said, "that they are in custody. And I am aware that Eden Cole is facing federal charges in significant part because of a decision I made 16 months ago that I should have made differently. Both things are true simultaneously." "I know," I said. "I have reported myself to the state bar," she said. "Regarding the unauthorized file access and my failure to report it at the time, I did that this morning. I had not known that. It had not been required of her. The state bar report was a voluntary disclosure, and no one had asked her to make it. That was the right thing to do," I said. "Yes," she said. "It was also overdue." I sat on the kitchen counter and looked at the Reykjavik photograph, and thought about what it meant that a woman who could have let the professional decision stay quietly historical had chosen instead to report it the morning after federal arrests were confirmed. Not because she had to. Because the accounting was not complete without it. I said, "Thank you for telling me." She said, "I'll have Saren reach out about the hearing dates." "Okay," I said. A pause, longer than logistical. She said, "Good night, Lena." "Good night," I said. The void ab initio hearing was 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning. Tuesday was when everything in this story had started. I did not believe in the universe organizing things meaningfully, but I noted the symmetry anyway. The Harlan County Courthouse was 200 miles from the city. The drive was the kind of drive that happens in late November, the landscape between here and there, going through its seasonal accounting, the trees having delivered themselves of their leaves, the sky flat and specific in the way of skies that have no particular ambition for the day. I arrived 20 minutes early and stood on the courthouse steps in the December cold that had settled over the world since November, sharper now, more committed. My breath showed. The building was the particular limestone gray of county courthouses built in the middle of the last century, built to last and largely succeeding. She arrived with 8 minutes to spare. Dark coat over the suit, the watch on her left wrist catching the winter light, her hair as short and deliberate as it always was. Her breath showed too. She came up the steps without pausing. "Lena," she said. "Veda," I said. We looked at each other on the courthouse steps for one moment that was not about the hearing. Then we went inside. The hallways of the courthouse smelled of institutional floor cleaner and old paper, the specific combination that exists in county buildings that have been processing the legal requirements of ordinary lives for decades. The clerk's office directed us to a courtroom on the second floor. The judge, who had the focused efficiency of someone with 17 filings before lunch, reviewed the void ab initio petition, the fraud certification from federal law enforcement, the forensic account documentation, and both our sworn statements. She asked 3 clarifying questions. She was satisfied by the answers. She signed the order. The marriage had never existed. The county record was corrected. What had been done in a forged document at this courthouse, 200 miles from anywhere either of us usually was, 8 months ago, by 2 people who had met at a corporate project site and decided to use our lives as the architecture of a crime that was unmade in approximately 14 minutes. We walked out of the building into the December morning. The steps were cold. The winter light was the particular honest quality of December light, no warmth in it, but more truth about the things it was illuminating. The town around us was going about its Tuesday with complete indifference to what had just been formally resolved inside. We stood on the steps for a moment. Veda said, "That's done. That's done," I said. I said, "We drove 200 miles to undo something we never did." She said, "That's accurate." I laughed. She almost did. The half-millimeter thing happened at the corner of her mouth, and I had been cataloging long enough to know exactly what it meant. I said, "Come, have lunch. Before we drive back, There must be somewhere in this town that will feed us. She looked at me. The cataloging expression, briefly, then the other thing. Yes, she said. 3 blocks from the courthouse, we found a restaurant that had been there long enough to stop trying to be interesting and had decided instead to be good. We sat in a booth by a window that looked out on the main street of a town neither of us had ever been in and would probably never be in again, and the food was the kind that knows what it is and does not apologize for it, and the coffee was excellent. We talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with the case, the nature of winter light, and what it does to a photograph, the 4 years she had spent in the federal prosecutor's office and what it cost and what it gave back. She asked about the Reykjavik photograph and what the light had been doing on the day I took it, and whether I had gotten what I was looking for. I said I had gotten something close, which was usually the best you could hope for. She said she thought that was true in most things. I pushed back on 2 of her opinions. She adjusted one and held firm on the other, and explained why with the precision that meant she had actually thought about the challenge. She adjusted one and held firm on the other, and explained why. I noted she was doing it for my specific argument, not for the principle. I catalogued it without saying so. We drove back to the city in the December afternoon, separately, and the drive was its own kind of presence. 2 hours of knowing she was also moving through the same flat winter landscape, also going back to the same city, also returning to whatever was going to come next. What came next was December. The federal case moved efficiently. Veda's state bar disclosure resulted in a formal review that concluded with a reprimand she received without argument. She remained a partner at Crane and Whitfield. The managing partners had decided that a partner who self-reported a professional failing was more valuable than one who concealed it. I returned to my work. 3 assignments in December, including a commission for an architecture magazine that required me to be inside buildings at dawn before anyone else arrived. The last was the kind of work I liked best. Empty rooms in winter dawn light, which is more honest than any other kind because it has no warmth to offer and does not pretend to. I thought about Veda in the empty buildings. Not romantically, or not only, the way you think about someone who has been occupying a significant portion of your interior life and has not yet vacated the premise. Blythe came for dinner on a Saturday in mid-December and assessed the situation with the efficiency she brought to everything she actually cared about. "You're waiting for her to say something," she said. "I'm not waiting," I said. "You've checked your phone 4 times since I arrived," she said. "And you keep going somewhere in your head that you're not telling me about." I looked at my phone. I had not been aware of doing it. "She's going to say something when she's ready," Blythe said. "You have been watching this woman think carefully about every word she says. She is not going to say it until the thing is ready to be said." "I know," I said. "So eat this," she said. "And tell me about the architecture buildings." I ate. I told her about the buildings. But Blythe was right, and I knew she was right, and the knowing sat with me through December in the way of things you are not handling as well as you believe you are. The text came on a Thursday evening in the week before Christmas. The city had put its best effort into December lights on the trees along the main commercial streets, the particular cold that made the lit windows of restaurants and coffee shops look like the warmest places in the world. It said, "Are you available this weekend?" Not about the case. I looked at those 4 words for a moment. Not about the case. I wrote back, "Sunday, come to me." A pause of several minutes. Then, "What's the address?" I sent the address. She rang the bell at 2 in the afternoon. The city outside my windows had the particular quality of a Sunday afternoon in December, quiet in the way Sundays are quiet when the week's business has stopped and the holiday has not yet arrived. A held breath quality. The world in the middle of something. I opened the door. She was not in the charcoal suit. She was in dark jeans and a gray wool sweater, and the same coat I had seen on the courthouse steps, which she had not yet taken off. Her hair was as short and deliberate as always. She was holding a paper bag from a bakery I did not recognize. She looked, standing in my doorway, like the version of Veda Holt that existed before she had decided that professional armor was the most useful container for everything she was. She looked like a person who had come somewhere on purpose and was going to stay. "Come in," I said. She came in. She looked at my apartment with the complete attention she brought to everything, the Reykjavik photograph on the wall above the cabinet, the camera equipment organized on the desk with the specific logic of someone who manages visual material daily, the bookshelves that had the honest chaos of bookshelves that are actually used, the kitchen where the light came in from the west window in the late afternoon way that I had always liked. She handed me the paper bag. "I didn't know what you had," she said. "So I got several things." I looked inside. She had, as described, gotten several things. A full and reasonable cross-section of a bakery's Saturday offerings, in quantities that suggested she had been more concerned with ensuring coverage than with proportionality. "This is an appropriate amount of pastry for this situation," I said. She looked at me with one corner of her mouth. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat 3 months ago on a Tuesday morning with a bank statement and a headache and a name I had never heard. The table that was now a very different kind of table. She had her hands around the coffee cup. She was looking at the cup and not at me, and I understood this as the equivalent of someone taking a breath before they say the thing they came to say. I said, "Take your time." She said, "I've taken quite enough time." She said it dryly, with the specific dry quality that emerged when she had given herself permission to be unguarded, and I had learned by now that it was one of the best things about her. She set the cup down. She looked at me. "I want to say something," she said, "and I am going to say it without the professional management that I apply to everything, which is more difficult than it sounds for someone who has been managing things in professional registers for most of her adult life." I said, "I know." She looked at the cup again briefly, then back at me. "I knew what I wanted the first afternoon," she said. "At the coffee shop, when you looked at the corner of my mouth and I could see you cataloging what you had seen there. That afternoon, when you laughed at the absurdity of what we were in the middle of and then you looked at me. I knew it in that moment, and I said nothing, because I was your attorney, and you were my client. And you were also a woman who had just understood that someone she had loved for 2 years had been using her as the foundation of a crime, and using any of that clarity for personal purposes would have been the most dishonest thing I had done in a long time. I held the coffee cup and looked at her. "I managed it," she said, "through the conference room and the courthouse and the 200-mile drive back from Harlan County, which I spent accounting for the specific way the winter afternoon light came through the car windows and what it would look like if you were the one documenting it." The Reykjavik photograph was on the wall behind her. November had become December, and the light through my kitchen window was the honest winter kind, doing its work without apology. I said, "I catalogued your millimeters." She looked at me. I said, "From the first day, the half millimeter at the coffee shop, the way you said my name in the hallway, the glass of water at the conference room window that you held for 20 minutes without drinking. I have been cataloging your millimeters since noon on the first day. What you were managing was not invisible." She held my gaze. Her hands were still around the coffee cup. I said, "I'm not asking you to perform something you're not ready to say. I'm telling you so you know the ground we're standing on," she said. "I want to know you, not as a client or a case. I want to know you the way I have been unable to for 3 months, the way you come into focus when you're talking about the Reykjavik photograph or the specific quality of winter light that has no warmth in it but tells the truth." I said, "That is not nothing." "No," she said, "it isn't." I said, "You're going to have to be honest with me. Not in the conference room way. In the way you were honest on the courthouse steps and in the Tuesday morning restaurant, and when you told me about Eden coal in a building, you were the last person in." "I know," she said. "And you're going to have to let me be wrong about things without correcting every inference the moment I make it," I said. She considered this. She said, "I will do my best. I am making no representations about my ability to watch someone arrive at a wrong conclusion in silence." I said, "That is the most honest answer you could have given me." She said, "I'm trying." I looked at her across my kitchen table. The woman who had arrived in my life through a bank statement in a plain envelope and had proceeded to be, in every way I had not anticipated, the most specific and particular person I had encountered in a very long time. Who was precise when precision was what I needed, and quiet when silence was what I needed, and honest, always honest, even when the honesty cost her something she had to count before she paid it. I said, "Stay for dinner." She looked at me. The composure was present, but the other thing was visible underneath it, visible in the way it had not been at the coffee shop or the conference room or the courthouse steps, because she had decided to let it be visible. "Yes," she said. We had dinner and talked until late. The conversation went to places that had nothing to do with fraud or federal courts, and in those places I found the person who existed outside every professional frame, curious, specific, capable of the dry humor that only emerged when she had decided someone was worth it, carrying opinions about city planning and the specific novels she had actually read with the same precision she carried everything. When she was ready to leave, I stood at the door with her while she put her coat back on, and December at 10 in the evening was doing what December evenings do, the cold coming in at the edges, the city quieter than its daytime self, the darkness, the kind that is honest rather than dramatic. She finished with the coat buttons. She was looking at me. I touched her jaw. She went still. Then I kissed her. It was everything 3 months of coffee shops and conference rooms and courthouse steps had been building toward: patient, earned. The restraint finally becoming something honest, instead of something withheld. She had her hand at my waist. Her eyes were open and looking at me with the expression that was not the composure and was not the cataloging. I said, "That's the thing you've been not saying." She said, "Yes." I said, "It's not nothing." "No," she said. "It isn't." I said, "Saturday." She said, "Saturday." She left. I stood in the open doorway of my apartment in the December cold for a moment after the elevator had closed, listening to the building and the city, and the specific quality of an evening that had become a different kind of evening than it had started as. The first time we were in public together after that, after conference rooms and courthouses, and my kitchen table was at a gallery opening in January, a month later, for a photographer I had known for years whose work I had always admired. I had not known she would be there. I was standing in front of a photograph that was doing something extraordinary with the quality of industrial light when I felt the shift in the room that I had learned, over 3 months of paying close attention, to associate with her presence before I had confirmed it visually. I looked across the gallery. She was near the far wall, in a dark dress that was not the suit but had the same quality of being a considered choice. She was looking at a photograph on the opposite wall. She had not yet seen me. Then she did. She came directly across the room. Not hurrying and not slowing down. The way she crossed toward me was the way she did everything without performing the crossing, simply making it. She came to stand beside me. She looked at the photograph I had been looking at. "The light," she said. "Yes," I said. "The light." We stood side by side in the warmth of the gallery with the January city outside the windows and the specific quality of two people who are not performing anything and are not managing anything and are simply present together without professional reason or legal occasion. Across the room, 2 of the photographer's close friends were watching us with the particular quality of attention that people deploy when they have been told something and are now in the presence of the evidence. They were not subtle. They had the warm, interested awareness of people who were very glad to be right about something. Veda's hand found mine at my side, not dramatically. Just found it, the way things find things when they have been looking for a while. I looked at her. She was looking at the photograph. She said, "Your instinct on the framing is right." I said, "I know." She said, "I know you know." I said, "Then why say it?" She said, "Because I wanted to say something that wasn't nothing." I looked at her. She kept her eyes on the photograph and the corner of her mouth did the thing. Not 0.5 millimeter. An actual millimeter, maybe more. The most I had catalogued. The gallery moved around us with its January warmth and its gathered conversations, and the photographer's 2 friends across the room who were definitely still watching. Neither of us did anything about that. Neither of us flinched. The light in the photograph was doing what the best light does, telling the truth about the thing it was illuminating. Not making it beautiful, not making it dramatic. Honest. I understood. Standing in that gallery with the city outside and her hand in mine, and 3 months of bank statements and marble lobbies and courthouse steps, and a Tuesday morning restaurant somewhere in the middle of the state behind us, that everything had arrived where it was supposed to arrive. Not neatly, not without cost, but correctly. A fraudulent marriage, a forged document. Two strangers put in the same bank account by someone who had meant to use them, who had, in the end, given them something neither of them had known to look for. It was, all told, exactly enough.